When a former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom speaks, the world listens. That is why John Major's recent words about Nigeria and the detention of Nnamdi Kanu have attracted so much attention. He is not a man who speaks carelessly. He is a statesman known for caution, calm judgment, and deep respect for the rule of law. So, when he looked at the situation in Nigeria and decided to raise his voice, it carried a weight that cannot be ignored. John Major was clear and direct. He said that Nigeria cannot continue to ignore its own courts. A country that values justice must also value its judiciary. He reminded everyone that courts are not just buildings. Courts are the very foundation of any democracy. They are the voice of the law. And when a court gives an order, that order is not a suggestion. It is a command that must be obeyed. He pointed out that the case of Nnamdi Kanu has gone beyond politics. It has become a test of Nigeria's commitment to the rule of law. John Major asked a simple but powerful question: if a government ignores its courts, then who will respect the laws of that country? He warned that once a government begins to pick and choose which court orders to obey, the trust between the people and the state begins to collapse. In his statement, John Major stressed that leadership is not about power alone. It is about responsibility. It is about doing the hard but right thing, even when it is not convenient. For Nigeria, this means respecting the decision of its own judiciary, even if that decision is uncomfortable for those in power. He said the world is watching closely, and every act of disobedience to a court ruling paints a picture that Nigeria should not want to show. John Major reminded Nigeria of its proud history as a leader in Africa. He said that Nigeria has always been seen as a giant, a country that sets the pace for others on the continent. But giants are not only measured by size or population. They are measured by character. They are measured by how they handle justice. And at this moment, Nigeria's character is being tested. Will it stand tall and honor its courts, or will it ignore them and weaken its own democracy? He also underlined that the issue is not whether one agrees with Nnamdi Kanu's ideas or not. That is a separate debate. The focus here is law, justice, and human rights. Every citizen, whether popular or unpopular, deserves equal protection under the law. John Major said that a government cannot claim to respect democracy while at the same time refusing to release someone when a court has ordered it. That contradiction is too loud to hide. He made it clear that this is not only about what Nigeria owes to Nnamdi Kanu. It is also about what Nigeria owes to itself. A nation that ignores its courts weakens its own foundations. The same laws that are ignored today in one case can be ignored tomorrow in another. And when that happens, nobody is safe. Investors lose confidence, citizens lose faith, and the international community loses respect. John Major did not hide his disappointment. He said Nigeria is too important, too strategic, and too respected in Africa to allow such a situation to continue. He reminded Nigeria that greatness is not only about economic strength or military might. True greatness comes from respect for justice. A government that obeys its courts shows the world that it is strong. A government that ignores them shows weakness. He also called on Nigerian leaders to think about the message they are sending to young people. Across Africa, young men and women are watching. They are learning about democracy by looking at Nigeria. If Nigeria refuses to follow its own courts, then what lesson is it teaching the next generation? He said that is not the kind of leadership Nigeria should provide. Instead, Nigeria should show that even the most powerful leaders are still subject to the law. That is the true meaning of democracy. John Major said this moment is an opportunity for Nigeria to shine. By obeying the courts and respecting the rights of Nnamdi Kanu, Nigeria can prove to the world that it is serious about justice. It can restore confidence, rebuild trust, and set a strong example for other African nations. He encouraged Nigeria to see this not as a burden, but as a chance to lead in a way that will be remembered positively in history. In conclusion, John Major's message in this first part was very clear: Nigeria must act with courage and integrity. It must show respect for its judiciary. It must prove that its democracy is more than just words. And above all, it must remember that the rule of law is not optional. It is the very backbone of a strong nation. John Major did not stop with Nigeria. After making his point about the importance of obeying court orders, he turned his attention to his own country, the United Kingdom. He said the UK cannot stand aside, fold its arms, and watch this matter quietly. For him, this is not just a Nigerian issue. It is also a British issue because Nnamdi Kanu is a British citizen, and his rights must matter to the British government. John Major made it plain that silence is not an option. He explained that when human rights are being violated anywhere in the world, especially when it concerns a citizen of the UK, the British government has a duty to step forward. It is not a matter of choice, it is a matter of responsibility. He asked a tough question: if the UK will not protect the rights of its own citizens abroad, then who will? He said the role of the UK is not to interfere in another nation's sovereignty, but to insist that international standards of human rights and justice are respected. This is not about telling Nigeria how to govern itself. It is about reminding Nigeria, and the whole world, that certain values are not negotiable. Freedom, dignity, and justice belong to everyone. And when those values are threatened, the UK has a moral duty to speak up. John Major stressed that this is not just a matter of foreign policy. It is also about national credibility. The United Kingdom has always spoken proudly about democracy, fairness, and the rule of law. But those words mean nothing if the UK stays silent when its own citizen is held against court orders. He said, a country that believes in justice must show that belief, not just at home, but wherever its citizens face injustice. He reminded the UK government that history is filled with moments when silence became shame. When powerful nations kept quiet in the face of injustice, later generations asked why they failed to act. John Major said he does not want the UK to be judged harshly in this moment. He wants his country to stand on the right side of history. He called on leaders in London to use their voice, their influence, and their diplomacy to press for justice. John Major also drew attention to the international stage. He said the world is watching how the UK responds to the case of Nnamdi Kanu. Other countries will judge Britain not only by what it says in speeches, but by what it does in action. If Britain remains quiet, then its message of human rights will sound hollow. But if Britain takes a stand, then its voice will carry more strength, not only in Africa, but across the world. He added that this is not only about politics. It is about humanity. He spoke about the simple truth that every human being deserves freedom and dignity. He said when governments begin to ignore those basic truths, they lose their moral ground. And when powerful nations like the UK fail to defend those truths, they weaken the very values they claim to protect. John Major's call to the UK government was sharp but respectful. He did not speak as an enemy of Nigeria. He spoke as a friend of both nations who wants to see justice prevail. He said the relationship between Nigeria and the UK has always been strong, but true friendship also means telling the truth. And the truth is that the continued detention of Nnamdi Kanu, despite court rulings, is wrong. He warned that ignoring this issue could damage trust between the people and their leaders. Both in Nigeria and in the UK, ordinary citizens are paying attention. They want to see their governments act with courage. They want to know that their leaders are not afraid to defend justice. John Major said governments should never underestimate the power of public opinion. People may be quiet today, but silence does not mean acceptance. In closing, John Major urged the UK government to step up. He asked them to remember that leadership is not about comfort. It is about responsibility. It is about defending principles, even when it is not easy. He said the UK must show the world that it stands by its citizens, it stands by democracy, and it stands by justice. Because if the UK fails to do so, then what message is it sending to the rest of the world? At the center of John Major's message lies one truth that cannot be ignored: fundamental human rights. He said clearly that every human being, no matter where they are from or what they believe, is entitled to dignity, justice, and freedom under the law. And in the case of Nnamdi Kanu, these rights are being questioned. That is why he believes the issue has grown far beyond politics and has now become a test of values, both for Nigeria and for the United Kingdom. John Major explained that human rights are not favors from governments. They are not privileges given only to those who are popular or powerful. They are basic guarantees that belong to every person simply because they are human. When a government chooses to respect those rights for one person but deny them to another, then it has broken the very principle of equality before the law. He said that is exactly why the case of Nnamdi Kanu is so important. It is not only about one man, it is about the credibility of justice itself. He stressed that the right to a fair trial, the right to freedom when courts have ordered release, and the right to be treated with dignity are not negotiable. These are cornerstones of every free society. When those rights are denied, it sets a dangerous example. If it can happen to one person today, it can happen to anyone tomorrow. That is why this matter carries weight not only for Nnamdi Kanu and his family but for every Nigerian citizen and even for every African citizen who looks to Nigeria as a leader in democracy. John Major went further to say that the international community is watching closely. Nigeria has often presented itself as a champion of democracy, both on the African continent and globally. But champions are judged by their actions, not just by their words. If Nigeria chooses to ignore its own laws and disregard the rights of one of its citizens, then it sends a message that human rights are optional. And once rights are seen as optional, they lose their power entirely. He also urged the Nigerian government to think about the long-term consequences. Disobeying court orders and denying human rights may appear to bring short-term control, but it always leads to long-term damage. It erodes trust between the people and their leaders. It discourages investment, because investors need to know that laws will be respected. And it weakens the country's moral standing in the world. He said no nation can truly prosper if it builds its future on injustice. Turning again to the UK, John Major reminded his own government that the rights of Nnamdi Kanu are not only Nigeria's responsibility. Because he holds British citizenship, the UK also has a duty to protect him. Ignoring this duty would mean the UK is turning its back on the very values it claims to defend. For John Major, the issue is not complicated. If Britain says it stands for justice and fairness, then it must prove it when one of its citizens faces injustice abroad. John Major highlighted that this is a moral test for both nations. Nigeria is being tested on whether it will obey its own courts and uphold the dignity of its citizens. The United Kingdom is being tested on whether it will stand up for one of its own when his rights are at risk. Both governments have an opportunity to do the right thing. Both governments also face the risk of being remembered for doing nothing. He stressed that the matter of Nnamdi Kanu should not be clouded by politics or personal opinions about his activism. Even those who disagree with his ideas should be able to agree on one thing: the law must be respected, and human rights must be protected. That is the foundation of every civilized society. To deny him those rights is to deny the very principle that protects everyone else. John Major ended his remarks with a challenge. He said Nigeria must choose whether it will be a country that respects the dignity of its citizens or a country that undermines its own courts. And he said the UK must choose whether it will defend the rights of its citizens or remain silent when those rights are under attack. These are choices that will not only define the present but will also shape how history remembers both nations. In the end, his message was simple but powerful: justice is not about politics, it is about principle. Human rights are not negotiable, they are permanent. And when those rights are denied, silence is not acceptable. Action is required. For John Major, the case of Nnamdi Kanu is not just the story of one man, it is the story of how two nations respond when justice is on trial.